Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by Edward Miskie, who is an author and a 13-year survivor of a rare cancer. He is the founder of a first ever film festival called the Remission Film Festival, which is going to come out in April of 2026. And it's for creatives who have been impacted by cancer, and it will go for the fundraiser Blood Cancer United. So we're going to be talking to him about everything that he's up to, about, his experience with cancer and his books and the film festival and everything that he's going to be up to. So Edward, thank you for joining me. Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am originally from central Pennsylvania. I currently live in New York City. I've been here for about 21 years, which is horrendous to think that it's been that long. but in 2011, I was diagnosed with a rare non-Hodgkin's lymphoma called rare enlarged B-cell Burkitt's-like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I did 4 rounds of chemo that didn't work. I did 30 days of radiation that did kind of work, and then I did a stem cell transplant just to seal the deal to make sure we were okay. I was a full time actor at the time, doing mostly musical theater around the country. I continued to do that after cancer, even though it felt a lot different than I thought it would, I guess. And also an author, that, as you mentioned, my book is out anywhere you buy books, called Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses, which is we're working on that being adapted for television. And of course, you mentioned the film festival, which I've also just founded recently. And I love cats, I love dogs, I love New York, and beyond that, I just just like to have a good time.
Well, let's talk about during that journey dealing with cancer. What experience most reshaped how you see yourself in your life?
I mean, I think in general, the whole thing. I think one of the things I talk about pretty frequently is how once you've had something like cancer, and this is true for PTSD in general, but cancer specifically, to the experience I've had, you often find that it's the best thing that's ever happened to you because it has changed so much of you for the better. Before cancer, I was young and I was stupid and all those other things. But when cancer was over, it took me quite a bit of time to kind of rediscover who I am and reshape who I wanted to be. And it gave me a lot of superpowers of like not tolerating other people's crap and like keeping good people around me and really kind of being hyper focused on what I wanted, and then of course discovering what I wanted through that whole process too. So I mean, yes, cancer is a pretty not fun experience, if you will. But it has, I wouldn't trade it. It really shaped all of my life. Everything that I do now is basically centered around cancer. Again, the book, the film festival, and I do public speaking, and I do a lot of outreach and partnerships with other cancer organizations. Um, fundraising and stuff like that, and everything I do is centered around it. And without it, I honestly don't know where I would be.
Well, let's talk about your book. You told your story in a unique way. Blending things like honesty and humor. So, tell listeners about the book, what they can expect when they read it, and basically what you expect them to take away from it.
Sure. The book kind of came from a place of, like I had mentioned, when you survive something like cancer, you kind of feel a little out of place, a little displaced in your own life. And I thought that I was crazy and I thought I was losing it. I felt really kind of depressed and disconnected from myself and my friends and my family and the life that I was living before I had cancer. I was really angry about that. I had a lot of anger about it. because it just felt so unfair that I was living this life that had so much promise and potential. And then, the universe decided to pull the rug out from under me. And in that time, I had met someone who became a friend and at the time had just recently been told that they were cancer free. And we had a conversation about it that very much echoed how I felt about the aftercare portion of it, where he also felt displaced and depressed and confused and didn't want to go to work and didn't want to talk to family and friends because everything was annoying him. And and just very on edge in a very similar way that I was. And I had this aha moment where it was just like, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only person who's been impacted in this way by having survived cancer. So I started reaching out to other people who had cancer as well in the past who had survived and asked them similar questions like, when you were told you were cancer free, what was it like? What was that transition back into your life? What did that look like? How did it feel? Did you ever get back to normal? Do you ever feel normal again? And all of them said no. All of them had something to say about the weird disconnect that you experience after cancer. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh, I want to write about this. I always knew I wanted to do something with having survived cancer. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. And after having talked to these people, I was like, "Oh my goodness, I need to write about this. I need to get this down and get this out of my brain onto a page. And I want to write a book and I want to make it fun, but I also want to talk about the aspects of having cancer and surviving cancer that are often not addressed. And for me, that means like, body dysmorphia and the aftercare, like I just mentioned, feeling displaced and disconnected. And then, of course, substance abuse. I drank a lot during chemo and after chemo, and even more the farther away I got from it, coping mechanisms and stuff like that. And dating, sex relationships, stuff that you don't really think of when you hear cancer survivor or cancer patient. And my biggest takeaway, and learning firsthand myself at the time as well, was you don't stop being a person when you're a cancer patient or a survivor. You're very much still a human, and oftentimes you're not treated like that. You're treated like a patient. You're treated like a chart. You're treated like a case study or a prognosis. And none of that's necessarily bad per se, because how else are people supposed to treat you? But it was a big wake up call, and so I wanted to turn it into a book, and I only hoped that the book would reach the right people and help a lot of people and help the people that it reached. And I did that, and I incorporated musical theater because that's what I was doing at the time. So we talk about cancer under the guise of musical theater, and of course, chronic illnesses being things like depression and body dysmorphia and substance dependency, and etc. And that's kind of where it came from, and it's been a really interesting journey to to having going from writing it to having it published to having a billboard in Times Square with the book and my face on it, and then having it carried in Barnes and Noble. Like it's been a really wild journey, just from that one moment of talking to someone and realizing that we're all kind of going through the same thing, and there is very little resources and very few conversations around it, around the aftercare, around survivorship. It's gotten a lot better. There are certainly like content creators and influencers who address this, who talk about it online a lot more than there were 10 plus years ago. There's an organization called Stupid Cancer, which specifically focuses on younger people who have gone through cancer. I'm currently working with them on some stuff behind the scenes as well. So it's, I've have somehow managed to accidentally fit right in.
We'll talk to the listeners about the Remission Film Festival. Tell us about how the idea came to you, and just give us the info about it.
Sure. So I the Remission Film Festival, it was just kind of like one of those things where like you're talking to someone or you're just kind of sitting around and all of a sudden an idea just like pops into your head and then you can't shake it. and it just all makes sense and it's kind of easy to assemble and put together. It was kind of like that. I don't even remember where I was or what I was doing, but I have been to a lot of film festivals. I love a good film festival, and I was noticing that there are shows out there, like TV shows that do talk about cancer, but they don't necessarily talk about the whole picture, as I was just talking about with the aftercare experience and whatnot. And and so I decided that I wanted to create a festival that we could invite people who have written something about cancer, who have experienced it, who have survived it, who have been impacted by it in some way, to create things and their tell their stories and put it into a film festival that is centered solely around that subject matter. And it kind of also came from again, all of this kind of like melded together into a pretty little bow. But
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
When it first kind of crossed my mind, I was talking to the people at Blood Cancer United. I was nominated as Visionary of the Year for their fundraising cycle in the second quarter of the year, into the second quarter of the year. And they were just like, oh, you can do fundraising in lots of different ways. You can do events, you can do parties, you can do whatever. And I just thought like, oh, the film festival, I could use that as a fundraiser. And now it has become this thing where this year being our first year, Blood Cancer United is of course the first beneficiary um, to the festival. But I hope to do this every year and have a different organization every year be a benefactor or a beneficiary from the fundraising we do through the film festival. It's going to be in New York City on April 17th at Symphony Space at the Leonard Nimoy Theater in the Upper West Side on I think it's 97th and Broadway, 95th and Broadway. I can't remember. I should probably learn those cross streets. But I'm really excited about it. We have a great jury. We have a bunch of up and coming TV people and film people who are going to be on the jury looking at all the submissions of all the different things that people will have sent to us and will have sent to us. We'll be choosing our selections and we'll be having winners, and it'll be really fun. I'm very, very excited about it.
Well, speaking of those submissions, are there any particular submissions or stories that particularly move you that you could think of?
I haven't watched them yet. Our deadline is our final deadline is mid-February. So once we hit that deadline, then I will be watching them. But I don't want to watch them just yet because I don't want to pick favorites just yet. Once we get closer, and I will convene with the jury, and we'll all sit down and watch, and we'll be announcing the selections in mid March.
Well, what do you wish more people understood about living beyond cancer and surviving beyond cancer?
I think the best part about having and surviving cancer, other than the fact that you get to live, is that you get to kind of start over in a way. And I wish this is something that I would have learned or at least figured out earlier than I did. But it really kind of is impossible to get your life back. Because you think that the whole time, like while you're in treatment, when you're being pumped full of drugs and everything else, you're all you can think about is how much you just want to get back to your life. How much you just want to get back to normal, how much you just want to be your old self. And that doesn't happen, and it can't happen, and it shouldn't happen, and you shouldn't want it to happen, because you know too much now. So I really want to impress upon anyone who either has cancer and who has survived it, or someone who knows someone who has, or whatnot, that it's okay to just scrap your old life. I kind of think of it in terms of death, like the old you is dead. The old you has died. They are no longer in existence, and the new you is now like kind of birthed out on the other side of having had cancer. And you kind of get to figure out who that person is, and you get to shape a future that is centered around this new person versus the person that you used to be.
Well, talk to us about Blood Cancer United. Tell us about that organization, what they do, and why you chose that for your first film festival to fundraise for.
Well, Blood Cancer United is actually the former Leukemia Lymphoma Society. They went through a rebrand this year. So if you've heard of the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, that is who we are working with. They are now just called Blood Cancer United. And their specific focus up until this point was blood cancer. And I think a lot of people just kind of assumed, because they were called the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, that those were the only two cancers that they really focused on. But they changed their name to Blood Cancer United because they wanted to be more all encompassing of all blood cancers, not just leukemia and lymphoma. And they do really, really great work. I had actually benefited from that organization when I was in treatment. Blood Cancer United, then Leukemia Lymphoma Society, gave me vouchers for car service to go from my apartment to the hospital, because I was immunocompromised and I was not able to get on a bus or a train. So they would send cars that had been cleaned by the hospital staff, so that they were sterile, for me to be able to go from my apartment to the hospital and back safely. And that was because of funding from Leukemia Lymphoma Society, now Blood Cancer United, that was possible. And I had a friend who had done fundraising for them in the past, and thought that I would be a great fit and a great match for this organization, and kind of presented me to their fundraising wing. And they loved me and I loved them, and we kind of signed me on board to be part of their Visionary of the Year campaign for 2026. And here we are. So I kind of didn't choose them. I was sort of plucked out of nowhere and put in front of them. But we have effectively chosen each other at this point. I'm very excited to be helping them out.
Well, you work in vulnerability, you work in arts as well as advocacy. So, talk about vulnerability and performance. Are those two the same, or how do you balance them if they're not?
I think that in a lot of ways they are the same. For you to give back in any way, whether that is fundraising, whether that is filmmaking, whether that's writing, whether that's performance, you have to be able to be vulnerable. You are showing a lot of yourself in those circumstances. Whether subliminally or metaphorically or very literally, you're being vulnerable just by the very nature of, let's say, a live performance. You're on a stage and you are being watched by hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And that is a very vulnerable place to be in. And so you just, over time, it's very scary in the beginning, and it does get easier, and it always will be scary and nerve wracking, but you do get used to it. You get used to being exposed like that in vulnerable circumstances. And certainly, as far as on-screen stuff, for the film festival, I actually shot a documentary called Back to Normal, which is a survivor's documentary, which is basically all that we've talked about so far about how you're not able to get back to your normal life after the fact. And that is very vulnerable for me, because it's the first time I'm really on camera on a big screen talking about all of this. It's very easy to do in person or on a podcast or on a YouTube show or situation, but on a big movie screen, it's a little different. So, having a vulnerable moment with that as well. But the thing that kind of keeps me comfortable in being vulnerable with people is that I know that my being vulnerable and talking about the unpleasant things or kind of the funnier things, or maybe not funny things, but things that I make light of to make them more digestible for everyone, is that by being vulnerable, you are helping other people and you are accessing their, their hearts and minds about what they've gone through and what they're experiencing. And hopefully in the end, that helps them and makes their lives better, even if just in a small way.
Well, what advice would you give the creators who are navigating illness, but they still, feel a calling to still do what they do and create?
I think it's important never to stop. And by that I don't mean do it all day, every day, all the time. I just mean, it is part of who you are, and you should always continue to do it. I know that when I was in chemo and radiation, I had created an online magazine that I was writing for. I'd created it, I was writing for it, I was doing everything. I was organizing photo shoots and kind of creative directing it from afar, very literally from a hospital room in some instances. But that fueled me, that kept me going, and gave me a reason to get up in the morning when I was having bad days. I was like, well, I have to do the magazine. Well, I have to get this going, and I have to get this done. And it kind of allowed me to not focus on what was happening to me, and give me an external focus and a project to do. And that magazine is sadly no longer. I was very proud of the work I did with that, but I think I had a great conversation the other day about what keeps you going in those circumstances. And I think it's very related to your question, in that, as a creative, you always want more and you always want to create more, because that's just what's in you to do. And I used and harnessed the anger I felt and the pain and grief that I felt having had this happen to me, and again feeling like I was robbed of a life, of a timeline that I'll never know and I'll never see. And I used that anger as fuel to kind of be like, well, if I'm not going to be able to have that life, then I'm going to create the one that I want. And I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to bust my ass and work really hard to make this happen. And I'm going to use the anger I feel to kind of propel myself along to make that happen. So for creatives who are experiencing something that has interrupted your life, or has got you down, use that. What it was right after Carrie Fisher died, where Meryl Streep reminded us that she had said, take that broken heart and turn it into art. Very similar kind of sentiment. Take the anger or the frustration you feel from your current circumstances and do something with it and turn it into something, or just use it as oxygen. Whatever you need to flip the script for yourself, do it, because it is going to help you more so than hurt you in the long run.
Well, besides your film festival, talk about any other upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to be aware of.
Unfortunately, I can't really talk about a lot of them because they're all still in the works. But, we do have the book, we do have the film festival, and we do have, I mentioned the documentary Back to Normal that will be premiering at the film festival in the spring. I tend to work in ecosystems when I create, so all of the things are connected. We have the book, which is related to the documentary, which is going to be featured in the film festival, which is a fundraiser for a cancer organization, which I, of course, then have spoken with. Um, so it's all connected, and that's pretty much my main focus for at least the next 6 months.
We'll throw out your contact info so listeners can keep up with everything that you're up to.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Edward Miskie. You can find the film festival on Instagram at Remission Film Fest. There's also remissionfilmfest.com. Um, if this is before February 19th and you have something that you would like to submit for the film festival, you can do that at filmfreeway.com/the Remission Film Festival. And if you miss us this year, come and find us next year. Come and find me on Instagram or TikTok, and let me know that you have something you would like to work on, and if I can help you, I will. And if not, I will point you into a direction that would hopefully be helpful to you. And we hope to see you guys there. If you're in New York City, it's at Symphony Space in the Upper West Side.
Close us out with some final thoughts, maybe, if there was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or any final thoughts you may have for the listeners.
Final thoughts? I think regardless of whether you're going through something personally or you're kind of affected existentially by things that are going on in the world right now, the best thing that we can all do for each other is support each other and keep on keeping on. And again, I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge the feelings that you feel and use them as fuel. You know, back to what I was talking about with using my anger as fuel to like create things. Very similarly, use the feelings you're feeling to create things, to get involved, to do something, because doing something is always better than doing nothing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so if you're in the NYC area, April 17th, please check out that film festival. You know, if you want to submit anything, do it. And check out Edward's books and everything that he's up to. You know, please be sure to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. And please go to www.curveball337.com, follow the show, leave a review, and sign up for the Living the Dream with Curveball email list. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Edward, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.